Hi, Joni here. The war is not a tie. Russia is quietly losing. That will be the topic of today's video. Many think that the war in Ukraine is a tie because they see it as a stalemate. Some people even think that Russia is winning because it's still advancing. And they also think that because Ukraine still hasn't managed to recapture all of its territory. But these people don't understand how wars work. Strategically, Ukraine is actually way closer to reaching its initial goals than Russia is. In this video, I will explain why Ukraine is actually winning and why Russia is facing one of the biggest military failures in modern history. In war, success is measured by strategic objectives. If one of the two sides reaches its strategic objectives and the other one doesn't, then the one that did is the one that wins. Russia's initial strategic objectives in this war were the denazification and demilitarization of Ukraine. In plain English, it means a government overthrow. Russia tried and is still trying to turn Ukraine into a satellite state. It is trying to overthrow Ukraine's government and install a pro-Russian puppet government. After 8 years of war in Ukraine, in 2022 Russia decided to launch a full-scale invasion. Russia targeted Kyiv, hoping for a quick collapse, and as we all know, it failed. And it will also continue to fail. Ukraine remains sovereign, democratic, and under Zelensky's control. Ukraine is actually the most sovereign it's ever been during its independence right now. For the first time since Ukraine's independence, Russia has no say over its decisions. And Russia is actually way further from reaching its strategic goals now than it was in March 2022. Russia's failure in this war will be studied in military academies around the world for the next decades. When it comes to Ukraine, its initial strategic goal was quite simple. It was to prevent Russia from reaching its strategic goals. That meant preserving sovereignty and resisting government overthrow. Ukraine has succeeded in its core mission, and it doesn't look like that will change anytime soon. And because of that, Ukraine is way closer to reaching its strategic objective than Russia is. And that makes Ukraine the winning side in this war. But the war is not over, and both sides have adopted secondary goals during the war. These secondary goals are way less important than the initial strategic goals, but they're still very important. Ukraine's secondary strategic goals include liberating occupied territories, while Russia's secondary strategic goals include securing a land bridge to Transnistria, and also gaining full control of the 4 regions it has illegally annexed. When it comes to these secondary objectives, the situation is more grey. Neither side is fully achieving them. Ukraine has regained significant amounts of territory. Russia occupied around 30% of Ukrainian territory at its peak in March 2022, but currently only occupies around 19%. However, full liberation is not likely anytime soon. It would require a combination of patience, more mobilization, much more military aid, and technological breakthroughs. But it can happen in other ways. Russia is an unstable country and this war is unsustainable for it. We saw how unstable it is during the coup attempt by Prigozhin in 2023. It's not impossible that Ukraine will regain some of its territories in other ways than through the use of force, but only time will tell. Russia, on the other hand, has secured a land bridge to Crimea, but it has failed to reach Transnistria, and it has also failed to fully occupy the 4 regions it has illegally annexed. Russia has gone all in. It has mobilized, heavily recruited, used prisoners, mercenaries, and North Korean troops. It has also shifted to a war economy, and yet it controls way less territory than it did 1 month into the full-scale invasion. Russia hasn't managed to capture a single one of the 23 regional capital and special status cities that Ukraine controlled at the beginning of the full-scale war. 0 out of 23. For an invading force with full initiative, that's a massive failure, especially after 3.5 years of full-scale invasion and over 1 million casualties. Russia is all in and this is the best they can do, despite getting major help from its allies, and even getting North Korean troops, and despite depleting Soviet stocks of equipment and moving to a war economy. To put this in perspective, imagine if the US, after 3.5 years of its invasion of Iraq, controlled less territory than it did 1 month into the invasion, and failed to capture any regional capital city. That would have been seen as a massive failure. We would all be shocked if the US failed like Russia is failing. And Russian propagandists would keep making fun of the US on TV and also on social media. But now that Russia is actually in this situation, they're trying to gaslight us. They're trying to hide this reality from us, to make us forget. The reality is that Russia is currently losing the war it started because it's not capable of reaching its strategic goals. But the war is far from over and anything is still possible. And despite its many pathetic failures, Russia remains very dangerous. The war has made it more authoritarian, more militarized, and more aggressive, and it has forced it to modernize its armed forces. Russia is now way better in drone warfare than any country in the EU, and its production of military equipment is at a pace that no country in Europe can match. But its war effort is economically and demographically unsustainable in the long run. and that is even acknowledged by some Russian officials. But to conclude, the bottom line is that Ukraine is achieving its initial strategic objective, surviving as a sovereign state. Russia is not. Russia might be slowly gaining some ground, but it's coming at an unsustainable cost, and without getting close to reaching its strategic objectives, which are the reasons why they started this war. While both sides struggle with secondary goals, Ukraine's success in its core mission makes it the current victor. But the war is unfortunately far from over. Europe has been extremely lucky that Ukraine has been so resilient, and that the US sent so much aid during the Biden administration, even if it wasn't enough. But we need to stop relying on the US, and we need to stop hoping for the war to end soon, because it won't. The only way to make sure that it ends is to step up our aid to Ukraine and step up our sanctions on Russia. Because as I've said many times in this video, Russia is far from reaching its strategic objectives, and that gives it a reason to continue the war. It can't afford to stop. There are 4 things we need to do. These 4 things will allow us to accelerate the ending of this war. First, we need to make sure that we keep helping Ukraine financially. Second, we need to increase our military aid to Ukraine with long-term commitments, which means placing large orders. As a part of this, we need to restart the production of things we don't produce anymore in Europe. France and the UK, for example, recently relaunched the production of Scalp/Storm Shadow missiles. That's exactly the type of thing we need to do. But much more can be done. Long-term commitments are key. The third thing we need to do is to invest even more in Ukraine's defense industry. Ukraine needs to scale up its production. And finally, the fourth thing we need to do is to increase sanctions on Russia and make it harder for them to circumvent them. If we do those 4 things, we can really help Ukraine. And by doing those 4 things, we can make sure that Russia will never reach its strategic objectives and will lose as a result. What do you think about all of this? Will Russia end up reaching its strategic objectives one day? Will Europe finally wake up? You know my takes, but I want to hear yours. Write them in the comments. That was it for today's video. I hope that you liked it. If you did, please like and subscribe. Also, please donate to my campaign. We're almost there. Ukraine really needs it. I will go to Ukraine soon. The link to the website of the campaign is in the description of this video. See you in the next video. Thank you. Slava Ukraini.